Hello and welcome to Am I a Heretic, Episode 2 with Father Gabe Griggs. Father Griggs is a local here from South Bend. He was a chess champion before going on to become a Holy Cross priest and his current rectorship here at Keough Hall. Thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, Charles. Glad to be with you.
So the premise of the show is we have a stack of cards chosen by my producers, and they're all random order. They're shuffled, so I don't know what the next question is. You don't know what the next question is. You're going to read the question, and then I'm going to try and stumble through an answer. And then I'm going to ask you if I'm a heretic. And you'll let me know whether or not I'm a heretic and what a good Catholic viewpoint on the question would be.
Great.
You ready?
I'm ready to go.
All right. Please take the first question.
You want me to read this to you?
Yes, please.
Is there sufficient reason to restrict the Latin Mass?
That is a hot topic question right there. So I'll have to come to this question with a bit of ignorance first, because I don't know a lot about the Catholic dealings in a lot of other countries. So my stance is only that of an American. I haven't spent much time in foreign countries. So from what I've read and what I understand, just as an everyday Catholic, just what I've absorbed from various sources, the issue was certain factions were using the Latin Mass as a means of subverting either something at Vatican II or something along those lines. I could be way off base here. From what I understand, it seems like restricting the Latin Mass was used as a way of getting the factions that were attempting to subvert various teachings to conform and so that we could have more unity. But I'm curious, I don't think, just on the base of things, that restricting the Latin Mass will necessarily fix those problems. Like if you have problems with factions subverting the teaching, then I don't know that further teaching and changing of things is the appropriate solution to that problem. So I'll have to ask you, am I a heretic?
No.
Okay.
Technically speaking, no, you're not a heretic.
That's good.
So I guess I try to give my answer to this question now too.
Yes, please. Or you can just tell me what I'm missing, you know?
Sure. I think basically your impression on the whole is sound. Essentially the practice of the faith is a matter of discretion, and one of the primary guiding principles is what is going to foster communion and what will foster the opposite of communion, fracturing. Now, there's an important distinction or maybe nuance to add to that, which is that in the Catholic Church, we have a great diversity of liturgical practices all under the umbrella of Catholicism. And in fact, we have 23 different rites within the Catholic Church, or churches within the Catholic Church in union with Rome. So there are a lot of different ways to celebrate the Mass and a lot of different rites that have their own proper histories and ways of doing things. And it's really interesting to get into those. And in fact, some of our, we have various Eucharistic prayers, for example. The Roman canon goes back, and that's the Roman canon because it was what the Pope used, and that's what we're most familiar with in the Roman Catholic Church. But then you also have, say, for example, the Assyrian Church. One of the Assyrian churches that goes back to the Apostles came into union with Rome, and they had a very different kind of Eucharistic prayer that required a good amount of liturgical thinking and theological thinking to understand how that related to and how that could be harmonized with how we think of things in the Western Catholic Church. In any case, to answer your specific question, I myself am a little bit ignorant on all the details, the various reasons why the Pope saw fit to issue, I think, a motu proprio, restricting this, or at least restricting it in such a way that people would have to get permission from the bishop to celebrate this Mass. If I were to guess, at the heart of it is a concern for unity in the Church and a concern for preventing fracturing in the Church. I think something in that same realm would be a concern for political polarization that has happened, I think, in most places, but especially here in the United States, what we're most familiar with. I don't personally have a well-researched enough, I haven't researched this enough to have a strong opinion on the matter. I think there's a lot of beauty to Latin. I had 6 years of Latin, grade school and high school. I think there's a lot of beauty to having a kind of a universal church language. And there are also aspects of that that are just practical, as well as historical. You know, for such a long time, Christendom was united with Latin. On the other hand, Jesus didn't speak Latin. There's nothing particular about the Latin language that makes it more beautiful intrinsically or anything like that. I also think that it's good for people to understand what's being said in the Mass. The prayers are beautiful. So there's pros and cons. In general, having a diversity of forms of worship is good, so long as we keep harmony and union. So the final thing I'll say on this, at least off the top of my head, is that it's good to have patience with these kinds of things. Church practice takes a long time to work itself out and to find the, I guess, the optimal working solutions. And one of the beautiful things about the church, and I would also argue one of the most practical and effective aspects of the church, is that it's kind of a distributed system. Bishops exercise discretion as to how worship is done in their diocese. And so you have a lot of different bishops doing different things, making different judgments about who can say the Latin Mass, which communities they welcome into their diocese, and so on. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think that gets really at the heart of it, and it raises like a couple of concepts in my mind. So there were you mentioned unity quite a bit, but it seems to me like there's two very essential parts, kinds of unity for the Catholic Church, and that's unity through tradition. So we're unified with all Catholics who have lived, because the Mass is constant in that, in a way, but also unity with those that we spend our time with on earth. And I think at times those can be at odds with one another, because, you know, sometimes you have people that like a certain unity with the people from the past, like a certain tradition, then other people perhaps like a different tradition. So then you have two unities that are disjointed almost.
I think I see what you're saying to some extent. Something like a unity with the dead, so to speak, and then a unity with our contemporaries.
Right.
I would add something else to the mix that makes this even more complicated, which is that in the United States, 21st century America, we live in a time where our sense of tradition and our sense of rootedness is extremely lacking. So there's a tremendous amount of economic mobility. There's a tremendous amount of cultural freedom to choose who you become. And I think for that reason, many people are growing up and they're looking for something to ground themselves in, something to root themselves in. And so it's not surprising to see that a lot of young people who have grown up in this are saying, whoa, this is too much. I'm looking for something that ties me to the past, to tradition. it makes a lot of sense to me, and in fact was part of my own conversion story, realizing there's this 2,000-year-old institution with some really smart people, and moreover, a good amount of really just the practice proving itself out, the practice of the faith. An institution doesn't last that long if there's not something good behind it. And I would even argue the church believes the Holy Spirit, of course, is behind it. Jesus is securing it. Okay, so to answer your question more explicitly, though, how do we think about these things? Well, I mentioned that background to say that I think we live at a time where we've grown up in this kind of consumer mindset where you choose the community that you're part of, much more so than probably any time in history. It used to be the case, you're born into a community, you stay in that community, you just, you're from small town Indiana, for example. That's what you know, that's who you are, that's the dialect you speak. You don't leave that place. Similarly, you grow up in, this is still true, say in some of the Eastern Orthodox churches, you grow up Greek Orthodox, it's tied to your nationality, it's tied to your culture, your heritage, and there's some kind of a rootedness there. We have a lot of people who feel themselves to be lost, and so they're looking for somewhere to ground themselves. I think that's helpful in terms of explaining and understanding some of that. I don't know where that gets us in terms of what is the best way forward. I do think there's a good place, an appropriate place for Latin. And it's important to recognize that that's, 1,700, 1,800 years of the church's history. I don't think that place is a small place either. That said, the church has always been the largest, and I would argue, I don't know how you argue this objectively, so to speak, but the most effective instrument of enculturation throughout the world as well. So in Holy Cross, for example, we are missionaries all over the world. The way that we do things in Bangladesh, the way we celebrate Mass, is totally different. Well, not totally, but it's the same in essence in terms of the liturgy of the Word, liturgy of the Eucharist, but looks very different than how we do things here and how we do things in France, how we do things in Chile. So the church is always in this fine balance between enculturation and preserving what is essential, handing on. The entire purpose of the church is to hand on what it has received, namely tradition and scripture, in those two, handing on those things. Sorry for such a long lecture.
No, I appreciate it.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think you really get at the heart of what my question was asking.
Yeah, this is fun. I'm happy to do, we just keep going.
Sure.
Is praying to a blessed the best chance of a miracle?
Okay.
Sure.
I think this question gets at the heart of what a saint is, and the fact that to be a blessed you have to have one confirmed miracle through your intercession, and becoming a saint you have to become two, and a saint is the highest. So what does the blessed most want to become? Well, of course, a saint. So there's a joke in the question, but it's also a real question. And that is what are the chances of miracles? I think this is fundamentally interconnected with that last question. And I'm going to go with no. Praying to a blessed isn't going to give you a different measurable chance for a miracle. But of course, why do people pray to blesseds, right? Of course, it's because you believe in their relationship with God. And, you can just pray to a, not to, okay.
Ask for the intercession.
Ask for the intercession.
To be technically.
I want to be very clear that I'm not saying like pray to, but what I mean is ask for the intercession of a servant of God or just a recently deceased friend that has a great relationship with God. And so that leads to what may become a saint. Like before somebody was a saint, somebody had to pray to them. So I think there's really two important parts to this question. And one is like, is there measurable chance of miracle? And I think the answer to that question is a resounding no. Definitely not. So I would say it's definitely not your best chance. However, the other question is, what does it mean to ask for the intercession of someone? Why would you ask for the intercession of someone who's not a saint when you don't know that they're in perfect communion with God? And I don't know that I have a great answer to that. I can say that I've done so myself. There was a former president of Jesuit High School, Father Raymond Fitzgerald, who passed away from ALS, but he had the most amazing connection with God that I've personally been witness to, even in some of the latest days of ALS. When he would celebrate Mass, it was hard for him to get the chalice off the altar. But if you asked him how he was doing, his answer never wavered. It was always better than I deserve. And I thought that was so inspirational for like young men to be able to be witness to. And I'm confident of his relationship with God and the work that he did on earth. But why I think the reason I prayed to him as there were twofold. It was first, he helped found a group. And so when that group would meet and pray, it was his intercession that we were asking for. And so perhaps it's his intercession in the group in particular. But if I were praying to him in a situation where I was hoping for a miracle, it would certainly be because I want him to be recognized as a saint, and for that recognition. And it almost feels sinful or like selfish in a way to be like, but I want my friend to be a saint, or like I want my teacher to be the one exalted and recognized or something like that. And I get that it's not in a way, but it feels very close to the case. So I think I know the answer to the question, but I'm going to ask you, am I a heretic?
No, you're not a heretic.
That's good to know.
And actually, I think you demonstrate your answer is a helpful illustration of the point that I'm going to make, which is that if one is asking oneself this question, they're asking the wrong question. I think the better question is, why do we ask for the intercession of saints to begin with? And why is it that miracles are granted and the result of the prayer of saints? The appropriate reason to ask for the intercession of a saint or a blessed or a loved one is because we have a connection with them in the communion of saints. That God saves us as a people gathered together, knit together, woven together as one body. So God uses each of us to help hold other people together pull them into the ark of the covenant, so to speak, or to lift them up, or to lower them down. The faith of the others lowers down the paralytic to Jesus, and Jesus says to him, their faith has saved you. That's an image of the way that we hold each other and tie each other together in the church. And when somebody dies, he or she is no less a part of the communion of saints. In fact, if they're a saint, canonized or not, they're even a greater part of the communion of saints, or the communion that makes up the church. church militant, church in purgatory, and so on. So I would say that the appropriate reason to ask for the intercession of a saint and the appropriate way in which to hope for a miracle is not really so much for the sake of the miracle, but for the sake of union with God and union with the church. Communion is what it's all about, essentially. And I mean, I don't know this to be true, but I would suspect that it's precisely in not seeking the miraculous that the miracle comes. I think miracles, this may be more reflective of my own bias, but I tend to think that the miraculous is more an epiphenomenon of a primary relationship with God. Or maybe a better way to say that is they're gifts. They're gifts that God gives us at his own discretion. And can be a gift that he gives us in the hopes that we turn back to him. Can be a gift that he gives us as a reward. But remember, Jesus also saves his greatest gift is to suffer and die as he did. So suffering is promised more than anything else, in some sense, for us on earth. I think that's primarily what I have to say on that. Yeah, I think that's predominantly what I have to say. Does that make sense?
I guess, can I, my question for you is how can we perform that discernment? Just on a day-to-day level for a Catholic like myself. How can I be, like, what question should I ask myself before praying to a saint?
Ask yourself, do I want to be this person's friend? Do I feel connected to him or her? Do I think that they have something to teach me about God through his or her example, his or her life? So for example, with a lot of young men, I will try to introduce them to Joseph. Say, I want you to get to know Joseph because I want you to learn from him what it means to be brave, courageous, chaste. It's good to get to know Mary because she teaches us obedience. She teaches us what lies in store for those of us who say yes to God wholeheartedly, to be assumed into heaven. Not that we will be assumed, but like she gives us a little glimmer of the kingdom of God and what that resurrection might mean for us. Saints who have been influential in my life, Gregory the Great, mostly by accident, but then I realized that my last name is actually a form of Gregory.
Okay.
So getting to know Gregory and how has he been influential in my life and why have I asked for his intercession? Well, I think fundamentally he had something to show me about my vocation. So Gregory the Great was called out of a monastery and into public life to serve. And I realized or connected with, resonated with that in my own life. There's a part of me that would love to be a monk. People used to joke like, why don't you join a monastery? Like, are you sure you want to be an apostolic religious? I say, I don't know how to explain this, but I feel like I'm called to be public and not cloistered. Other saints too, I mean, they become influential at various points in your life. Maybe for somebody overcoming an addiction, Mary Magdalene. Maybe for somebody who feels like a lost cause, St. Jude. There are a lot of reasons why you might connect with a saint. Does that make sense?
It does.
And or a personal connection, as in the case of your principal or the priest who you got to know at your school.
Father Fitzgerald. Yeah, he was the former president. One person I've found really inspirational recently is Father Walter Chiswick.
Oh yeah, he's awesome. He leadeth me, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
fact, I think
Jeez.
I have that book on my shelf somewhere.
It's a page turner and a half, but I don't want to turn the pages because of what I know is about to happen on the next page. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was really great to be with
That was
you.
awesome. That was a lot of fun.